So Jolyon Rubinstein, he's the freelance broadcaster and showing from London, UK. And he organizes the show The Revolution will be televised.
Big fat Donald. Right, quick selfie. Donald, is this a good time to ask your daughter's hand in marriage?
Just wanted to give you this balloon.
Thank you very much.
Would you give me a sign of it?
Well, George signed it, and Boris. Lewis Johnson, pathological liar, everybody loves it. Are you lying right now?
Mr. Clinton, they're really forcing all the bills down our throats and taking us to the cleaners if you get my gist.
No.
No. Oh, thank God, this is right. I've got your hook on the economic crash. I didn't make a few tweaks. I changed it to all brown. I fucked the economy. That's textbook. Just think they need it.
And the BAFTA goes to The Revolution Will Be Televised.
First of all, we just really love to thank the coalition government. We're all in it together. So, OMG. I am Sam Smith and welcome BBC.
OMG. WFC.
I'm coming through the bell Pottinger board. I think I am on the list. What kind of list is this? Schindler's List? Is this not ringing any bells?
Oh my God, but seriously, what should we do about an interventionist policy in North Korea?
About what?
Have we done enough to curb the spread of Ebola?
What's that have anything to do with the price of cheese?
The price of cheese? Is it expensive?
You know Ebola's going to be huge, though.
Oh, they're going to be absolutely amazing.
GFMYA? Just collect money from bankers today.
It's for the bailout, mate. What is it here?
Oh, it's give us back our fucking money, you assholes.
Native Americans. So, tonight on my USA special report, guns! Woo! People talk about the mentally ill. You'd have to be mentally ill not to want to have one of these in your home, would you?
Cheap American tax. Buy today, throw it away tomorrow. I've got some nice scented candles made out of a fat of dead. Would that get you in the mood? Smell dead please.
My name's Alternator, Street Magicians. I get the feeling you work in accountancy. Can you write your name on this card, please?
One sec.
Turn around.
James and Barnaby have been sent to America on a fact-finding mission.
Ted, can I just say, fantastic job you did opposing the bomb address.
Proud of our National Health Service. My mother, for instance, she had a fantastic free care and she had these awful bunions on her feet. Did you ever get bunions, Ted?
So, can I just take a selfie with you? Absolutely lovely.
Hello, we're just a Finnish embassy. Well, I've clamped your ambassadorial car because you owe £133,000 to congestion charge.
Balls, balls, balls!
We shall overcome.
That is definitely not what I'm used to seeing.
These adult males are conversing in their very peculiar dialect of the child.
Oh, fantastic! Hello.
Hey.
Hey, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Good. It's such a surreal thing talking to you guys through. I feel like Edward Snowden. Just kind of like beaming in. I mean, it isn't impossible because we did do quite a few things about Vladimir Putin and his incredible works, whether it was sort of finding incredibly ancient Greek artifacts at the bottom of the ocean, or just sort of striding around on a horse in a totally unhomoerotic way. So maybe passing through would be a good idea. So yes, what you have watched is the professional idiocy and blagging that became known as The Revolution Will Be Televised. So Britain at the time was in a state of coalition government, and things were actually quite amusing. It wasn't really in any way similar to the sort of festering, brutal public dialogue that politicians and the populist right all over the world are sort of taking on now. And I'm not even sure that if we put the show out now, it would really have had the same effect. Because at the time, people wanted a sort of comic vigilante justice, and we were sort of able to provide it. So, you know, obviously we were very inspired by the work of like Sacha Baron Cohen, sort of growing up in a not totally dissimilar part of North London, by the work of like Jon Stewart on The Daily Show, Nathan For You, which is another fantastic comedy show. Obviously, I know you've got, you know, one of the lead writers there from The Onion. The Onion was a big influence, but what really was the biggest influence was just reality. Very depressing, bizarre reality. And what we really tried to do was take issues that were difficult and make them funny and digestible. So, for instance, one of the topics which was hardest to dress up was a policy that was going on in 2010 and had been happening under Tony Blair's government, which was extraordinary rendition, which is the abduction and the illegal transfer of a person from one country to another, and whether you're a milkman or a spy, it's completely illegal. And it was posited that MI6 had been involved with the then Foreign Secretary Jack Straw and Tony Blair in helping to move Libyan dissidents Colonel Gaddafi didn't like back to Libya. I say alleged because you know, I have to legally, and that's blatantly not true. And basically, what we decided, we were like, how do we turn this into something funny? It's so dark. So we thought, okay, MI6 is a torture club, all right, Vauxhall, there's quite a lot of Vauxhall, which is an area in South London where there's a lot of kind of torture clubs. So we literally turned MI6 in our sketch into the best torture club in town. I became a internet host of a station called the Dutch porn station Double Fish TV, and we turned it into a nightclub, and we had lots of extras dressed in PVC outside the nightclub, which was actually MI6. You know, we sort of then would use the police as props. And the way we did this was we made sure that we did three things very, very well. One was we never committed any criminal damage. Two, we actually never did anything illegal. And three, we had white privilege. So, if my name was Abdul, there's absolutely no way the show would be able to get made. Because as a white man, especially when you're dressed in a suit, you can sort of do anything. As long as you say sorry afterwards. As timing sort of passed, we made sort of 3 series of The Revolution we televised in BBC. The first series won a BAFTA. The second series was nominated and lost to James Corden. Not bitter at all. And then we sort of had as I'm sure a lot of creatives understand, there was a sort of changing of the guard for people who were running our channels at the BBC. And we started doing more sketches. And one of the issues that we hadn't dealt with was ISIS. So some of you may have heard of the show like The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. So we decided to do The Real Housewives of ISIS. And that, I think, is I was actually with you now, which I'm sorry I can't be because of slight ill health. I would have shown you a deck which outlaid a kind of case study of it. So and I think this is an interesting point. So when we made it, we put it out on television. This is a 10 p.m. Slot with a general average of about 800,000 to 1 million viewers, all age generally the average age of BBC is about 59. It went out and there wasn't really any comments. There's some tweets about it, but hardly anything. The next day, the BBC released it on their Facebook page as a sketch with no, bit of archive before contextualising it. and it became the 8th most shared piece of BBC content of all time. It had 75 million views, something like 28 million shares, and pretty evenly split between people who absolutely hated it, thought it was Islamophobic, that it was demeaning and could increase particular violence against women. And there was another group of people who thought this was brilliant and vital and necessary and at all. The reason I talk about it is because that's the point of good satire, is you shouldn't really be able, in my opinion, to know exactly what the writer's viewpoint is. He is presenting in this case, a very toxic situation. It's heavily researched from reports coming out of Raqqa, and then put that into a sketch. And it generated huge debate, not just in the UK, but in France, Germany, the United States. And it's a piece of work that, you know, I'm very proud of. At the same time, people like Alex Jones and Katie Hopkins, I'm not sure if you're aware of who she is, I hope you're not, start being your champions. You know, it's very, very strange experience. And it's also strange for the people around you, because at the time, you know, there were some people who we worked with closely who were much more concerned than I was, and I'm sure anyone involved in sort of political comedy you know, feels the same. So look, I'd like to hear from you. Once again, apologies for not being there, and thank you for listening.
Questions?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sandra from Latvia. I'm a journalist and documentarian. I have a question. How do you get to achieve to get to such a high level events? Do you use your BBC card, or is it the BBC press card? Is this, yes. If you could sell us some tips.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, it's all magic, right? A good magician never reveals his trick. We are absolutely not anything to do with the BBC. The show was independently produced by a production company called Hat Trick Productions. They make a very successful show called Episodes in the States. They also are the sort of bedrock here. They've got a show called Have I Got News For You, which, you know, it's strange talking about it today, as Parliament's just about to be prorogued, because a lot of people think they gave a sort of a platform to Boris Johnson. Boris, what a bastard. And yeah, I cannot stress enough how, if you're going to make this kind of comedy, your best friend in the world is a very well-to-do, upper-class white woman, or at least put that on their phone voice, because they were like, oh, hi, we'd just love to come down and film, you know, something little for a youth audience. And they seem to be very taken in by it. I have been incredibly lucky to work with some extraordinarily talented producers and assistant producers. For instance, we spoke to the KKK in Alabama, or when we went to see Tent City Prison with Sheriff Joe Arpaio. I thought the access was extraordinary myself, just being there. You have to have legal access. You remember, everything you saw on that reel has been legaled and has gone through editorial policy at the BBC and has been broadcast, and no one was sued. Because what we were doing was we were re-reporting stories that were already in the public domain on a number of news sites. So you can't just say anything, obviously, because otherwise that would open you up to defamation and libel and slander. But yes, get a really good assistant producer to trick them into thinking that you're doing something for a youth audience, whilst at the same time, legally, be basically doing what you're saying, which is important.
Hi, Anka here. So what you do can be seen by some as a bit outrageous, and I wonder, have you ever been threatened?
Yes.
And sorry, did this make you take any changes or do things a bit different?
No. It's super important, I think, that you. I always feel. I don't know if you've ever seen Beyonce talk about like Sasha Fierce, and when she is on stage, she's like Sasha Fierce, and that's how she does it. And to me, when I'm in character, I mean, I'm pretty intense at the best of times, but you know, it's easier to behave in an outrageous and frankly rather preposterous way, and to feel sort of a level of internal, you know, protection. Does that answer your question? Sorry, maybe that wasn't a great answer.
Maybe I was going in the direction like even being life-threatened. Were you ever afraid for your safety because you're mocking at these people?
I think it's very strange answering this today. In Britain right now, there is a constitutional crisis, and I was asked to go and speak in Parliament Square last night, the night before even, and something has changed fundamentally in the election of Bolsonaro, Donald Trump, and our own Boris Johnson. And for me, the moment that things changed was I was actually filming in India, and I looked at my phone, and it said, when he was a candidate, you know, Donald Trump announces Muslim ban. And I don't know if you've already spoke about the Overton window, but the idea of the Overton window is that through public discourse changing, the language of public discourse, what is seen as acceptable to say in public can shift. And I believe it was the fundamental totemic moment that things fundamentally shifted. And if we were doing some of the stuff that we were doing now, say we'd been doing it at Charlottesville, it would have, you know, you probably would have been punched in the face a lot. I have not been punched in the face. His face has been unpunched, and we're still going. It is also super important to stand up for what is morally right in this world, because, as you know, has been said many times, if not you, who? Yeah, it's important.
Thank you.
Thank you. One last question.
Hi, I'm Sergey, and I'm wondering, since you're doing so many edgy stuff and you know so much of the really on the brink kind of jokes, do you ever feel that the audience is getting number, and do you feel compelled to make it edgier and edgier? And how do you cope with that need to get edgier in a time where everything is already pretty edgy and crazy? So how do you make the next step forward?
It's a really interesting question, man. Thank you for that. I actually think that you need to do two things. So, for instance, for the last 2 years, I made a political podcast called Spotify, which is politics and comedy, and it just got progressively less funny because the world was getting less funny. And what I'm doing actually is, I'm sure you're all aware of the terms confirmation bias, the idea that you can just, you know, basically people just don't really listen to facts, they just reconfirm what they already think is the case. The very nature of that means that the point of satire was to hold something up to the world for you to look at and have a discussion about, and hopefully help, you know, the satirist. It enables that, you know, very important dialogue to happen about taboos and toxic issues. Now, the far right have published papers regularly saying if we dress our views up as comedy, if we laugh about it, things will shift the public dialogue. So what we're doing, and what I think is very important to do, is look at things on a human level. So I'm doing scripted comedy at the minute, which is much more about, rather than Brexit and the NHS, it's more about faded yellow lines for parking and local libraries being closed. And although that might seem tamer, they're actually exactly the same thing. Our show was fundamentally didactic. You know, it was like, this is the point. And I think work like that is quite dangerous. I also think, particularly in the American market, and working with Comedy Central at the minute in the States, it's like there is so many political shows that it almost doesn't have the traction anymore. And also, to be honest, man, you know, we've got a real problem in a minute. Because if you told me in 2010 that the President of the United States would have tweeted in caps locks at Iran, you know, I would have said, no one's going to buy it. It's too ridiculous. It's not going to happen. So we are constantly being sort of outdone by the absurdity of real events. Can I just say, what I'm most sad about not being with you today is, you know, a lot of you are in countries that formerly were in the Eastern Bloc. I am really gutted that I'm not there. My Twitter handle is @JOLYONRUBS, Jolyon Rubes. Please get in contact with me. I would love to see some of your work. You know, I think, you know, I think really all of you, including, I know there's someone there from CNN and from The Onion. You know, our work now is more fundamentally important to the fabric of society than it's ever been. You know, I am appalled by the rise in homophobia, the incredibly regressive moves around abortion, and you know, how in danger Roe versus Wade is, and by the narrative, by the populist narrative that points the finger at the most vulnerable. You know, it's a test of a society. It's truly, really that.
Oh, God. All good things must come to an end. Oh, are you back?
I am still there.
Okay.
I'm happy to stay for a couple more questions. I don't know if you have to go, but just to say, like, you're all heroes, man. Doing what you're doing is fundamentally important, and you're all clearly more interested in social capital and looking after other people than, you know, private capital and looking after yourself. So give yourself a big round of applause.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you feel better soon.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate what you're doing. You know, hopefully I can join you next year. That'd be great.
That's it.
All right.
Thank
See
you.
you later. Thank you.